Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining the Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East's NDP Leadership Debate on Palestine. My name is Yara Shoufani, and I'll be joining you as today's moderator on behalf of CJPME, a nonprofit organization whose mission is to enable Canadians of all backgrounds to promote justice, development, and peace in the Middle East. Today, we are joined by NDP leadership contestants Heather McPherson, Tanille Johnston, Avi Lewis, and Tony McQuail. Thank you to each of you for taking the time to join us today. I'd also like to acknowledge NDP contestants and prospective contestants who are not here with us today. Rob Ashton was not able to attend due to a scheduling conflict. Aspiring NDP contestant Bianca Mugeni is also not present today despite being available to join, as this debate was only open to approved NDP candidates, and she has not yet been cleared by the party to join the race. On this topic, CJPME would like to express concerns about the NDP vetting process in hopes that this process can be made to be more democratic in the future. Today's debate is taking place at a critical juncture. For the past 2 years, everyday Canadians have watched in horror as Israel conducted a live-streamed genocide against Palestinians in Gaza. Israel's genocide has claimed the lives of over 73,000 Palestinians, according to the lowest estimates, and destroyed over 85% of Gaza's infrastructure. Despite repeated claims of ceasefire agreements, we have continued to witness mass civilian casualties, forced displacement, and continued aggression against neighboring countries. Meanwhile, hundreds of thousands of Canadians across this country have taken to the streets, written to their representatives, and organized to demand that the federal government put an end to Canada's complicity in genocide. Israel's assault on Gaza has undermined the credibility of international law and of the so-called rules-based international order, and expose the double standards that govern whose lives are protected and whose lives are expendable. At the same time, the United States has taken an increasingly aggressive foreign policy approach towards its neighbors and in the Middle East, and the choices made now will define Canada's role in the coming decades. There is no question that Palestine has become a key issue in Canadian politics, with data showing that a majority of Canadians want to see Canada take stronger action in support of Palestinian human rights. Palestine has moved thousands of Canadians into action and continues to be a decisive issue for Canadian voters who have worked tirelessly not only to advocate for Palestine, but also to hold Canadian politicians accountable to their stated values and promises. Historically, the NDP has played a critical role in representing progressive Canadians who insist that Canada's foreign policy must be rooted in justice and human rights, and who expect Canada to act with moral courage on the world stage. As the NDP increasingly brings advocates' demands into Parliament, today's debate presents us with a unique opportunity to share with candidates the political priorities of the Palestine movement and to question candidates on the role Canada must play in defending human rights, accountability, and the rule of law. On that note, I'd like to thank the following organizations for contributing to tonight's questions: the Arab Canadian Lawyers Association, Oxfam Canada, Independent Jewish Voices, El Shabaka, and the Palestinian Youth Movement. I would also like to thank our supporters, without whom our work at CJPME would not be possible. If you'd like to support events like these, you can become a CJPME monthly donor at our website at www.cjpme.org. While CJPME is a nonpartisan organization, we'd like to note that if you are compelled by any of the comments of the speakers today, you can register for NDP membership by January 28th, 2026, in order to vote for one of the contestants for NDP leader. On that note, I'd like to make a few comments about the rules of the debate. Tonight's debate will be split into several sections. There will be time for opening remarks, and there will also be time for long-form and short-form questions. We will also have a lightning round where we will be asking contestants 12 questions to which they will signal yes, no, or yes, no, or decline to comment on their screen. We will also then conclude with closing statements. Rebuttals are allowed, but will be managed by CJPME staff. As a moderator, I will have final discretion on any of the decisions pertaining to the flow of the debate. The event is scheduled for 90 minutes, but please be aware that we may go over time depending on rebuttals and response times. Speakers will have a timer visible to them and should hear a ding when their time has expired. We ask the contestants to stop speaking when your time has expired, or you may be muted by CJPME staff to ensure that we have enough time to cover all of the topics on schedule for today. The speaker order is randomly determined for the first round and rotated thereafter. And a note that none of the questions were shared with the contestants before the debate, but contestants were informed of the general topics. On that note, I'd like to shift us into the opening statement. The topic of the opening statement is personal values and Palestine. For the opening statement, you'll have 3 minutes and there will be no rebuttals offered during this section. The opening statement question is, each contestant here tonight has publicly expressed support for Palestinian human rights. To begin this debate, we ask that your opening remarks be framed around how your personal values and lived experiences have shaped your perspective on the struggle for Palestinian freedom and self-determination. We'll start with you, Tony McQuail.
Well, good evening, friends. I'm a father and a grandfather. I'm a farmer who works with the land, and I've been a political activist for all my life and a New Democrat for 45 years. But I grew up and am still active as a Quaker or a member of the Religious Society of Friends. And our testimonies are accompanied in the acronym SPICES, which stands for Simplicity, Peace, Integrity, Community, Equality, and Sustainability. And that has certainly informed my life in many ways. One of my experiences as a teenager was my parents hosted international students who couldn't go home for holidays when they were at university in the United States, where I grew up. And I got to know several young people from Lesotho, Africa, which is a landlocked body inside South Africa, and their stories of the treatment of them both inside Lesotho, but also when they tried to move to the airport, or that really made me appreciate what apartheid meant to human beings and what a terrible thing it was. As a young adult, I was a non-cooperator or refuser with the U.S. Selective Service System and initially planned to go to prison. But as it was revealed that the wardens were putting prisoners where they could be sexually and physically assaulted, and also when I realized I'd have to be a tax resister after I got out of the 5 to 10 year, or the 2 to 5 year prison sentence and paid the $5,000 to $10,000 fine, I emigrated to Canada. And I felt very fortunate to be in Canada, but fast forwarding in terms of my values, Quakers have had a long-standing involvement with Palestine and Gaza. There's the Friends School in Ramallah, and the Canadian Friends Service Committee has been supporting, boycott, divestment, and sanctions, which I support. And with the genocide as it developed, I was just feeling such despair. But some of us locally got involved in the Grandparents Against Genocide movement. And so personally, I spent a bunch of time with a two-sided sign out on our local road, where our side road hit a local paved road, trying to draw attention to the issue. And I got stopped by people in the street who'd seen me there and appreciated what I was doing. So nobody can do anything or everything, but we all have to do something when governments don't take the action that they need to do in terms of international law and the defense of humanity and human values. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Next, we'll go to Heather McPherson.
Thank you very much, and thank you for putting this event on. I think it's so important. It's such an important conversation to have. We actually had a virtual town hall with over 1,000 people registered to talk about this issue, to talk about what more we can be doing to push back on the reality that we are seeing, the ongoing genocide that is happening in Palestine. My name is Heather McPherson. I am the Member of Parliament for Edmonton Strathcona and have been the New Democrat Foreign Affairs critic for the last 4 years. And I have to say, even before that, my whole career has been on fighting for human rights and for international development, for women's rights, for peace building around the world. And I have long felt that the crumbling world order that we see is, as in fact, perfectly shown in what happens in Palestine, what has been happening for decades in Palestine. The world right now is a very scary place. What Donald Trump is doing, the threats that he is making around the world, the wars that we see around the world, the ongoing genocide that we continue to see day in and day out for years in Palestine. Yesterday, Mark Carney talked about how the world order is crumbling, and nowhere is that more clear than in the failure of the Canadian government to stand up for the people of Palestine, to stand for international law. My career has been built in international law and human rights. It is what I believe to my core, and I cannot believe how difficult it has been to get the government to move. I'm very proud of the work that I've done as the critic for foreign affairs. I'm very proud of the work that the New Democratic Party has done to move the needle on Palestine. The fact that we have spoken about the rights of Palestinian people in the House of Commons was something that people did not think was possible years ago. When I brought forward that motion in March of 2024 to recognize that we needed to do more to build peace for Palestinians and Israelis, that was the first time in our parliament that the rights of Palestinians had been considered. I'm proud of the record that I have of pushing this government. In this parliament, M1, the very first motion tabled, is to recognize the state of Palestine. Not with all of the strings attached that we saw with Mark Carney, but to recognize the state of Palestine finally. I went to the West Bank with some of my colleagues, with Lindsay Matheson, with Matthew Green, to see firsthand what is happening with the occupation, to see firsthand what people are living through. And bringing that knowledge back drives me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Heather. And on that note, we'll move on to Tanille Johnston.
Thanks so much. Hey everyone, I'm Tanille Johnston. I'm calling in today from Licklisto territory, which is my home community of the Uwakay First Nation in Campbell River. I'm a working mom, a social worker, a city councilor, and running to be the leader of the NDP because I want to see our party stand up loud and strong with force for justice abroad and at home. I grew up in a working class family. I've spent my career on the front lines with people left out by systems built for profit. As a First Nations woman, my values on international justice come from that lived experience of colonization and attempted cultural eradication. When I look at the Palestinian struggle, I see a reflection of Indigenous peoples here in Canada. The theft of land, displacement, unlawful occupation. We've seen this story before. It's not new. What we've been witnessing from Canada, the bombing of hospitals, the destruction of 80% of buildings in Gaza, the starving of an entire population, the use of AI weapons, the killing of journalists, men, women, children by Israel is ruthless and heartbreaking. This occupation of Palestine began way before the last 2 years. And at every step of the way, Canada has been complicit to the Israeli war crimes in Palestine. Truth and integrity are two of my core values, and the way Canada is calling itself an ally, yet funneling arms to the USA, knowing damn right where they're going, is hypocrite and embarrassing. That's why it's so important to note Israel's ongoing genocide in Canada for what it is, colonialism at work. We desperately need foreign policy rooted in justice that means, at minimum, closing the U.S. arms loophole to Israel. And if we're serious, it means standing with Palestinians and their allies in their call for broad sanctions, including a political economic boycott of Israel until Palestinians are able to live in peace and justice, similar to those in Canada. To those the Canadian government
I know that there's a snowstorm outside, and so there's been issues
we
with
need to be
Wi-Fi.
unafraid saying that anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism. My values say we should be standing with all people facing genocide, and that means people in Sudan and Congo as well. We need to be calling out the fact that liberals continue to export weapons, upholding a free trade deal, and provide diplomatic cover for Israel, while we have Mark Carney planning to join the so-called Board of Peace headed by Trump. So thank you so much for organizing this tonight, and I look forward to the conversation ahead for this evening.
Thank you so much, Tanille, for joining us and for your comments. We'll pass it over to Avi Lewis.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks to CJPME for hosting this, and hello and thank you to my colleagues. This issue is a deeply personal one for me. I come from an anti-Zionist Jewish tradition. My great-grandpa Moshe Lodge was a leader in the Jewish Labor Bund in the Pale of Settlement, what is now Belarus, I think was then Poland, among Ashkenazi Jews. It was a Jewish socialist, anti-Zionist trade union and political movement. Founded in 1897, just 5 weeks after the first meeting of the World Zionist Congress. And so I'm part of a tradition that I think we're really seeing come back in Canada in this moment. I'm very proud to be part of that. I wasn't always an anti-Zionist. Like many Ashkenazi Jews in Canada, I've been on a lifelong journey to unlearn and unpack the Zionist myths that most Canadian Jews were brought up with. A big part of that for me was in the 1990s, I hosted a show called Counterspin on CBC News World, a nightly live televised debate show. And I learned a ton during that period of the Oslo Accords, debating the Accords on live TV. And I had experts like Atif Kaboursi and Jihad Alawewi, who were my teachers on my television. And I learned then that Oslo was a trap. Israel never had any intention of a real two-state solution. And the Palestinian position was absolutely proven true. That the whole thing was a sham. And I learned that on live TV as a journalist. I visited Gaza in 2009, 6 months after Operation Cast Lead. I was there with my partner Naomi Klein and our friend Cecily Saraski, one of the founders of Jewish Voice for Peace in the US. It was utterly devastating to see buildings utterly destroyed, government buildings, courts. And I flash back to that now. It was a life-changingly hard experience. And I just think about an entire society ground to dust and realize that those earlier attacks were a shadow of what was coming, of course. Had a surreal experience on the way out of Gaza when we crossed back into Israel at the Erez crossing, and we were kept waiting for hours. And then I was summoned to the highest level of the checkpoint in the corner office, and a colonel sat me down. And apart from the disgusting comment he made, "Could you please keep your woman under control?" He pointed out the window to me and said, "You see those tanks moving? We were ready to go into Gaza and get you. We know that you don't agree with us. We know that you're a traitor against our cause, but you're a Jew. And we would have mobilized thousands of soldiers and tanks to go in and rescue you from those terrorists." And I was frozen in horror, but the message, your life is worth more than others, that supremacy, that pure expression of supremacy, that's the ideology we're fighting. We have to build a mass multiracial movement, an anti-racist coalition. Palestinian rights are human rights. That's the lesson.
Thank you so much, Avi, and thank you to all of you for your answers. On that note, we're actually going to shift gears into our second section of the evening. For this section, we'll be answering 2 questions, and you'll each have 2 minutes per question. And during this period, rebuttals are welcome. And so for the first question, it's something that some of you, in particular you, Tanille, already touched on with regards to the arms embargo and the US loophole. And so our question is, will you commit to fully banning two-way trade of any military shipments with Israel, including transfers through the United States loophole, even if it risks Canada's special relationship with Washington? Additionally, under what circumstances would you lift the embargo and resume sales to Israel, if at all? And so for this question, we'll start with you, Heather.
Thank you. And thank you for this important question. Listen, this is something that we worked on extraordinarily hard, my team and I. We were the ones that I was the one that was able to bring that opposition day motion to the House of Commons that talked about the arms embargo. And we actually were the ones that at the Foreign Affairs Committee were also able to bring that back, bring that that to the Foreign Affairs Committee and get that information. You know, we negotiated with Melanie Joly to get her to agree to an arms embargo, and she never had any intention of doing that. Never. So absolutely, I can 100% commit that an NDP government or an NDP leadership, if I was the leader, we would not support the selling of arms to Israel. Absolutely not. And it's bigger than that. You know, New Democrats know we've done that work on nuclear disarmament, on stopping landmines, on cluster munitions. The work that we've done on demining and dearming needs to continue. We need to close those loopholes. I'm extraordinarily proud of the work that Jenny Kwan has done with the bill that she's brought forward to close those loopholes. And we need to continue to push the government to make sure that no goods, no military grade goods are going to Israel to be used against innocent people, nor are they being sent to other conflicts around the world. You know, I think about Saudi Arabia. I think about the way that they are fueling the war in Sudan. There's so much that we need to do to improve our work and to ensure that we are in fact aligning with the Arms Trade Treaty, which is the law of this land. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. We'll pass it over to you, Tanille.
If I can unmute. Yeah, thanks. I mean, yeah, kind of as I offered in my opening, Canada can't claim to be against genocide while it keeps selling weapons or components at the end up into the hands of the United States that just ships them off to other countries that are, you know, committing international law violations, straight up genocide all over the place. It's horrific, and it's hypocritical of us to be engaging in that in any way, shape, or form. As leader, absolutely, we need to put full steam behind things like Jenny Kwan's bill in front of the House for debate, using every tool that we have to get Liberals and Conservatives on record about their positions and forcing votes. Had the honor of attending the Action Network, the collaboration that happened last night, and that's the kind of movement we need behind this work. Hundreds of people calling their MPs all at the same time saying, we have to do this, we need this bill to pass, and registering how those MPs are providing their feedback publicly. Transparency is huge in this work, and we need to leverage that for the benefit of progress, because when people know how their MPs are going to vote or what their MPs are saying in regards to bills like the no loopholes, it really creates that accountability. And as you know, kind of the masterful group of 7 that we have in the House of Commons right now, that transparency needs to be our best buddy. That's how we create awareness that this is completely unacceptable, and that we're engaging in just horrific acts of genocide through funneling these arms through the USA simply for profit. Right? It's all about money. It's all about making money, and it needs to be about people, not money.
Thank you, Tanille. And also just a note, if candidates are able to consider the final portion of the question, which is under what circumstances would you lift the embargo and resume sales to Israel, if at all? And so I don't know if either Heather or Tanille would like to comment on this before we shift over to Avi and Tony.
Well, I mean, listen, there is very clear legislation. I mean, it's very, very clear how international law works. You cannot sell arms to a country that is using them against citizens. I mean, that is the rule of law. So that, as long as those things are continuing. I mean, I'm a firm believer that we should be disarming around the world, that we should be investing in diplomacy, that we should be investing in international development, in poverty reduction, in rights for women, not investing in arms. But we even have a legal framework that we would work with, that we need to keep in mind, that you do not give weapons to countries that are using them against innocent civilians. And that is something that we see time and time again that this Canadian government is doing.
Thank you, Heather. And if Tanille, you have any comments on that, please feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I mean, Heather's our rock star in this area, and I don't have anything different to
Yeah, I think it's
a trust to build, right? That's a lot of significant relationship to rebuild before you're thinking essentially about rearming a country that has done nothing but, you know, break international laws and commit genocide. So, yeah.
Thank you, Tanille. And I'll pass it over to you, Avi.
Thank you. Yes, we absolutely all of us support a real two-way arms embargo on Israel. I feel confident saying this because we've been in so many debates together. And regarding the loophole, Jenny Kwan's bill to close that U.S. loophole is an absolute parliamentary priority. But it's for the NDP and for all of us. But it's not enough. And I think the reason is in the question. Because of the special relationship between Canada and the United States, just an arms embargo on Israel, including the US loophole, is not enough. We are so integrated militarily with the United States that until we have an independent foreign policy and an independent military from the United States, we will always be complicit in the United States unending support for the apartheid government of Israel. So I think this second part of the question, under what circumstances would we be willing to lift the arms embargo, is really important. First, we have a genocide that has not stopped and it must be stopped. Then we have an apartheid system in Israel that has to be dismantled before Israel can really be considered anything other than a pariah state, in my view. Then we have a Palestinian state, Palestinian liberation and freedom that needs to be recognized. And then we can start talking about lifting an arms embargo. But also, as long as Israel is acting with impunity, during the genocide, Israel has gone, in some periods, attacked 6 or 7 countries within just a couple of weeks, firing missiles into capital cities of other countries. This kind of impunity puts Israel outside of any bounds of morality. And Canada should not only be having an arms embargo, we need to cancel free trade deals and other issues that we'll get into later in the debate. I can't imagine from this present moment a time when Israel would actually be considered a legitimate source for Canadian arms. And I don't think we should be selling a lot of weapons anyway.
Thank you, Avi. And I'll pass it over to you, Tony.
Okay. Yes, we need to have a very solid arms embargo against the United States that is not only military arms components, but also fuels that are utilized by military equipment. But on a much bigger issue, we need an arms embargo against the United States because they are no longer a state we can trust as a country. Back in the 30s, before the Second World War, J.S. Woodsworth, Cooperative Commonwealth Federation leader, was one of the few voices saying, why are we selling scrap metal to Nazi Germany? And that scrap metal came back as tanks, bombers, and bullets that killed a lot of people in Europe. So the idea that we need to disentangle the Canadian military from the US military, that we need to stop arming. And I don't think there's any, I would like to see us take any of our military industries and turn them into things that are working for renewable energy, energy conservation, energy efficiency. Let's take the trillions of dollars that the world has squandered on militarism and the hundreds of thousands of human man years and woman years and the creativity to waste it on militarism, to put it to work on the things that human beings really need. And we have got to stop. I've spent my whole life under the threat of mutually assured destruction, of the nuclear arms race. And now the modern military is just about as ugly as Hiroshima was. You know, if you look at the kind of devastation that Israel's doing in Palestine, that Russia and Ukraine are experiencing. So we have got to change what we're doing and rethink and redesign our approach to how we deal with each other on this planet, or we're not going to have a planet to live on. So yes, arms embargo. And I agree with everything the other candidates have said. We have got to take action and we've got to do it now. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. And Heather, I see you'd like to offer a rebuttal.
Yeah, I just wanted to also flag, one of the things that was really horrifying, and I think it goes to this idea of the two-way arms embargo, is noticing that they were actually selling Israeli arms to Canada, and they actually were testing them or bringing them to Alberta under the guise of battle-tested weapons. So we all need to be very clear what a battle-tested weapon coming from Israel is it is being used against Palestinian children. It is being used against innocent civilians. And the government of the day, the Alberta government and the Canadian government allowed that to happen. So we have to talk about it as a two-way arms embargo as well. We cannot be accepting the military goods from a company that is, or from a country that is testing them on innocent children. That's very, very, very important.
Thank you, Heather. Avi?
Absolutely. And on the two-way side, Israel militarily enmeshed tech companies have been training police forces. And for many, many years, Palestine and Palestinians have been used as a laboratory for the technology of social control that Israel exports as one of its major exports. Canadian police forces should not be training with military relationships with Israel. And there are many technologies now, including the use of AI and targeting, that Israel is going to be exporting. And we have to be careful because many other countries are doing joint agreements with Israel around training, around all of these elements of social control. And we have to be careful not to be in alliances where Israel is using techniques tested in a genocide to sell these technologies to other countries. Canada's got to stand up against that as well.
Thank you, Heather and Avi, for these notes about the import side of the two-way arms embargo. I think that's why this demand has been so critical for so much of the movement. And we've also unfortunately seen the import side be referenced by Anita Anand repeatedly as a reason why a two-way arms embargo is not possible because of Canada's reliance on Israeli weapons components. On that note, just a small reminder with regards to rebuttals is if we can keep them sort of related to kind of commenting on something that another contestant has said, that would be wonderful, just in the interest of time. So I'll move us over to the next section, which is on, or the next question, which is on the future of self-determination in Gaza. So Prime Minister Mark Carney has agreed in principle to the invitation to join Donald Trump's Board of Peace, which is taking over temporary governance of occupied Gaza. What is your position on the creation of and composition of this board and Canada's participation? And what should Canada do to promote genuine self-determination for Palestinians in Gaza? And so with this question, we'll be starting with you, Tanille.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I was pretty shocked at that latest announcement coming from our government. Gaza's future must be determined by Palestinians, not by Trump, not by Netanyahu, and certainly not by our government leader, Mark Carney. As an Indigenous woman, I know the struggle for self-determination, that at the center of any real anti-colonialist movement for justice. I know it's something that I know is so closely related. Any so-called peace plan that leaves Palestinians under occupation, under siege, is not self-determination. So this is why we should oppose Trump's current peace plan, under which Palestinians are still being bombed. It's not going to get us to the independence and the sovereignty that they deserve, and it's going to continue just us witnessing the horrific nature of the relationship that is happening right now between Israel and Palestine. Yeah, I'm going to leave it at that for now.
Thank you so much, Tanille. And Avi, will pass it over to you.
Thank you. Yes, this is a surreal moment. And Carney's equivocation on the so-called Board of Peace is incredibly dangerous. This is a colonial construct. It's already peopled by a rogues gallery of charlatans and criminals. Netanyahu is already on board. Tony Kushner and Marco Rubio and Stephen Witkoff. Are we serious here? And when Trump is walking into other countries like Venezuela to grab their resources and advancing this thing, which is a stark threat to the entire UN system, as a mechanism that can decide peace in other conflict areas, it's like a traveling Berlin conference or something like that. Like, what is the point of it if they're not going to use it to divide up the resources And they're all, Trump is a real estate player surrounded by them. And land is the fundamental issue underneath self-determination, as Tanille says, around all colonial projects. So this is ridiculous. And Canada, should be a no-brainer for Canada's prime minister. And it's very disappointing indeed to see him leave this out there and hanging. The question is about the future of self-determination in Gaza as well. And I just want to say that I think Israel is doing its best to kill the two-state solution and bury it under the rubble in Gaza. But it's premature to talk about the shape of a future state. I want to reiterate that. For me, the order of operations must be end the genocide, dismantle the apartheid system, and then some kind of process for millions of people, none of whom are going anywhere, has to be determined by the people on that land once Palestinian freedom and liberation is achieved, because people cannot negotiate the shape of their future arrangements when they're living under the heel of another country.
Thank you, Avi. And on that note, I will pass it over to Tony.
Well, I think we have to be very clear about calling out delusional thinking and the idea that Donald Trump can lead a peace movement thing in an area where he has no background, no context, and not going to involve the people who actually live there and know the territory and have lived the friggin' history for the last 75 years is just insane. I'm going to try not to swear during this session, but it is insane. And we have now a situation where our leaders are jumping on the delusional bandwagon and trying to sell it to us. It is crazy. To get true self-determination and to get real peace, you have to work with the people who are there. And you have to do it in a way that respects their experience and their history. And the Friends Service Committee, which I mentioned earlier, has been working with Mayor Savat in Israel, supporting people who are resisting and refusing to cooperate with the Israeli military and refusing to serve. We have to build networks across the borders and across the Israeli and Palestinian line of people who want peace, who recognize the essential need for peace, and understand that for peace to happen, it has to be based on respect, equality, fairness, and that is certainly not what we are seeing from either Israel at this point and the Zionist approach, and we certainly will not see it from Trump and his cronies. And this is something that Mark Carney should just be saying, no, this is toxic, this is insane, and we need to get back to working with the United Nations. We need to get back to being a peacekeeping force if we can get something instituted there to help stop this genocide and then start working for real peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. I actually would like to open up an optional question. If any contestants want to comment, we'll offer 30 seconds to respond to the following question. But many of you have referenced self-determination. Do you think Canada should make its support for a Palestinian state conditional on Hamas non-involvement? Tony?
No. There was a time when Irish people were terrorists. Now they're sitting in Parliament. We have to recognize that your terrorists are my freedom fighters, and my freedom fighters are your terrorists. We have to stop demonizing somebody who says, I don't really like what you're doing to my country or to my people. And if we say no, well then let's make sure Israel's not allowed to be there. Because I'll tell you, I suspect 30 seconds are up. Israel's probably seen as a terrorist organization by a lot of people in Palestine.
Thank you, Tony. And I'll pass it to Avi, and then Heather will go over to you for a longer comment.
Well, first of all, on principle, no conditions on self-determination. None. Canada shouldn't be placing conditions. Trying to exclude Hamas from negotiations is to ignore the state of play and and will only fuel more dissent within Palestinian society. This is a classic divide and rule tactic. and it has no place in a genuine process towards some kind of peaceful negotiation.
Thank you, Avi. Heather, we'll go over to you. And you'll
Thank
have
you.
2 minutes and 30 seconds to respond.
Well, thank you. And first of all, I think I'll start with that last question. You know, there are 7 million Palestinians and 7 million Israelis, and there is the only way to peace is a diplomatic path. You know, we have seen this in other conflicts. I spent some time actually in Ireland speaking to people who had worked through the Troubles and recognizing that there is only a diplomatic peace that we have to build. In terms of the board of peace, of course it's absurd. You know, of course this is a ridiculous thing to put war criminals on. You know, Netanyahu, Putin, Tony Blair, to put people on that and call it that some sort of institute of peace is absolutely absurd. This is a clear attempt to undermine the multilateral system in this world. This is a clear attempt to undermine the United Nations. You know, even the fact that we have not seen the condemnation of the attack on UNRWA headquarters that just happened, the destruction and bulldozing of UNRWA headquarters. This is, you know, there are no women on this. There are no Palestinians on this. The fact that they are not even included in that conversation means that it should be completely excluded. Mark Carney needs to be extraordinarily clear with all Canadians that that is not something that we would participate in. To say nothing of the absolute ridiculousness of a $1 billion grift to Donald Trump. This is the opposite of helpful. What we actually need is good, solid conversations about what a peaceful future looks like, so that innocent people can stop dying, so that Palestinians can begin to rebuild their lives, so that Palestinians who've been excluded from their own homeland can come home. That's what we should be looking at. You know, I pushed the government multiple times to ensure that Canada would not be involved in anything that did not include the right to return for all Palestinians. And I cannot get an answer from this government. I will continue to push, but if we really want peace, if we really want to build peace for Palestinians and Israelis, the Board of Peace is the absolute and utter wrong direction.
Thank you, Heather. I'll pass it over to you, Tanille, to comment.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that I added my no to the conditions. I didn't want anyone to be wondering what I was thinking. And also just a quick little piece. Imagine what we could do with the money that we're apparently going to pay to join this Board of Peace. We could do a whole lot of other really, really great things with that money versus contributing to something that is just a hypocritical mess and cover story for probably starting multiple wars in other countries. So yeah, thank you for coming back.
Thank you. And on that note, we'll shift over to the second section. For this one, these are a little bit longer, these questions, so they'll be 3 minutes or less, and rebuttals are welcome. And we've got 3 questions in this section. So the first one is, why do you think that Canada's support for Israel has been nearly unconditional for decades? What needs to happen in Canada for there to be a meaningful shift in foreign policy towards Israel and other allied human rights abusers? And the order on this one will begin with you, Avi.
Thank you. Yeah, if you can, you've thrown it in the chat already. Yeah, I tried to answer this question in my last documentary for a show I co-founded on Al Jazeera English television called Fault Lines. It was in 2010, and it was during the Harper era, and it was a documentary that I made called Canada-Israel: The Other Special Relationship. And I think that we are trapped in Canada in an elite political consensus. And we desperately need a leader of the New Democratic Party who can not only speak clearly on the consequences of Israeli apartheid, but on its causes and start the path to getting Canada out of its unconditional support. Canadian foreign policy is not just shaped by this long history of unconditional support for Israel. Unchecked corporate power in our country determines our foreign policy, goes hand in hand with subservience to the US empire, the Western desire to control resources across the Middle East. And we have what Tanille mentioned, this solidarity between settler states who will stop at nothing to dispossess Indigenous people. And this has been the approach whether Liberals or Conservatives are in power in Canada. although conservatives are more extreme even in their rhetoric and positions. But the fundamental challenge for us as a movement of movements is we have to break the dominant story. I think politicians in Canada have been conditioned by the Israel lobby, by the mainstream media, the corporate media, by by evangelical Zionists to feel safe when they repeat the almost like a magical incantation of the two-state solution, two peoples living side by side in justice and security. And we need to break that rote response. And a lot of them revert to it out of fear of being called an anti-Semite by the Israel lobby, which is incredibly active and effective in Canada. And we have to expose the actions of the Israel lobby. And that's why I initiated this project with some of my colleagues at the Jewish Faculty Network and a report that I co-authored called A Pattern of Anti-Palestinian Racism and Genocide Denial at the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs. The CJ report is a really important attempt by Jewish scholars to break the story that the Israel lobby tries to reinforce day after day after day, that you cannot criticize Israel or your life will be ruined. You could lose your job. You'll be accused of being an anti-Semite and a terrorist. The National Post will go to town. All of these reinforcing mechanisms enforce this ideological story. And that's why we need a racial, multi-generational coalition to break it. We need the street movement, we need a political party, and we need media and communication storytelling that will tell a different story of what Canada's role in the world should be. And I think we all have a role to play in contributing to that huge effort. We need to tell a new story. We need to write it together.
Thank you, Avi. Tony, we'll pass it over to you.
Yes, I think we need to recognize that in our current political system, money talks and power talks, and we have a political system that's been governed by elites before that have been in control of Canada since before women and ordinary men got the vote after the First World War, and they continue to control it. And they're controlling it out of an ideology that says the people who should govern are the wealthy, and we should have a system that concentrates that wealth. And so we have an elite that believe in a corporate capitalist consumer society, which says trade is more important than human lives. That's why they're not interested in an arms embargo. And what can we do to fight that? Well, independent Jewish voices, other groups, and we all have to become allies in saying, being against genocide, being against apartheid, being against discrimination, racism, sexism, all the different things by which human beings get divided and then used to oppress each other are wrong, and build the kind of collaborations, cooperation, and coalitions that stand together and say, no, when you go after the least of these, that's what you're doing to all of us. When you support Israel in a genocide and an apartheid system beforehand, you are doing this to all of us. And so we have to build that, because we have a political system that has been very good at dividing us. And certainly the lobby on behalf of Zionism and Israel as a state, not as a religion. Judaism and Israel should not be confused. But we've had a system that has been very good, as Avi said it very well, so I don't have to reiterate that. But we have to look at ways that we can work together, collaborate, and tell a different story that calls out racism, genocide, all the different things, and says, no, that is not who we are as human beings. Because as human beings, what really defined us, and which is why our species is still here, is we learn to care for each other and share with each other. An anthropologist will tell you that is our big skill as human beings. And our leadership in greed and stupidity have lost track of that. And we are going to destroy the life support system of this planet if we keep letting them govern and let them divide us so they continue to hold the reins of power. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. I'll pass it over to you, Heather.
Thank you. In order to protect human rights, in order to do what we need to do around the world, We require a government that actually has, moral clarity, moral courage. And that's not the government that we have right now. To be perfectly honest, we have seen time and time again. It is something that has enraged me since I have become a member of Parliament. That the government of the day stands in the House of Commons and they pick and choose whose human rights matter and whose human rights don't. And for me, there is no protection of human rights unless every single person's human rights are protected. When we see the government do things for Ukraine, when that illegal invasion of Ukraine happened by the Russian Federation, and the Canadian government said unlimited Ukrainians can come here to shelter. And then there were 90,000 Afghans, and then there were 5,000 Palestinians, and then there were 500 Sudanese. That is putting a price tag on a human life. That is not what our government should be doing. What they do right now is pick winners and losers. They are a pale shadow of the US foreign policy. It is dangerous. There is no moral clarity. There is no adherence to international law. When Mark Carney talked about the fact that the rules-based international system is broken, he helped break it. It was the failure of our government. It was the failure of governments around the world to stand up for human rights, to stand against anyone, ally or not, who is committing war crimes, who is committing genocide. We are a signatory to the Genocide Convention. We have obligations. We have obligations to take. Now, I will also say, the way we push back on this, I've been so proud to be able to represent the incredible activists across this country, to be able to bring your voice to the House of Commons, to speak on your behalf, because that's how we make this change. The million plus emails that I have received in my office from Canadians from coast to coast to coast that have said, no, not in my name. No, don't do this. That's power. That's power. And we need to continue to do that. We need to continue to hold our government accountable, continue to push to make sure that regardless of this priority on profit over our planet, over the people that live on this land, we have got to stand up for human rights. It is our shared benefit, because I will finish by saying a human right is a human right is a human right. If you don't protect one, you don't protect any.
Thank you, Heather. And Tanille, we'll pass it over to you.
Thanks. Yeah, as people are checking off things that I was already going to say, I was like, where can I pull out my other ones? Yeah, human rights is a big conversation. We do a very good job in Canada of hiding the fact that we don't treat everyone equally. Big old happy Canada up here that doesn't even have potable drinking water across its own country. Yeah, we do a really good job of hiding that. We seem to collect relationships with other countries that are active in colonial activities and committing active genocide. Why don't we stop that relationship? Money. We make money off selling weapons and weapons components to other countries. Money drives a lot of these decisions that we're making. Our foreign policy, I mean, it's been created by our arguably all conservative governments. Our liberals don't really look the way that liberals once looked when my parents, maybe their generation of voting, the liberals maybe looked a little bit different. Even going across the country, it's interesting the varied levels of conservatives. Our conservatives over on the West Coast are pretty conservative, and they kind of ebb and flow a little bit across the country. But that's who's creating our foreign policies, who has created our foreign policies. We need an NDP majority government so we can change all this stuff, so that we can actually rewrite some of these systems so they actually function, so they do maintain human rights within our own borders and outside of them. So, but the two big things, we need the NDP majority, because a lot of this stuff is of no interest to liberals and conservatives, the political will, and we need to shift away from thinking only about money. It has to be about humans.
Thank you, Tanille. And since there's been a lot of, I think, affirmations and agreements on this question, we'll skip the rebuttals portion of this section or of this question and shift gears to another really pressing question in light of Bill C-9. And so civil liberties advocates have been warning that Carney's proposed national security legislation, Bill C-9, would target Palestinian solidarity, effectively creating a Palestine exception to free speech under the guise of public safety. Will you commit to opposing the specific provisions of Bill C-9 that allow for surveillance and criminalization of peaceful advocacy, such as bubble zones? And so for this question, we'll pass it over to you first, Tony.
Yes, I would definitely oppose those. And I'd really basically oppose the whole bill. Quakers have had a long-standing tradition of trying to speak truth to power and to oppose unjust laws and oppose exploitation and repression. And they have chosen to do it peacefully, but not always conveniently. If you want to protest or oppose something, you may have to try and stick yourself as a wrench in the spokes of whatever machine you're dealing with. And that doesn't come without risk. But freedom of speech, lawful assembly, protesting genocide should not be considered a threat to society. I can tell you, when I was standing out on County Road 86 with my Stop Gaza Genocide sign, I was a little anxious. Was some right-wing jerk going to stop and give me a lot of grief? No, the people who stopped said thank you for standing up for this. I have been so despairing. I have been so depressed. We need to unite that force. And the only way we can do it is if we can say genocide is going on. Call genocide, genocide. Call oppression, oppression. We have to be able to speak out. Otherwise, the effort to control the story and to control dissent and societies move forward when dissent over time changes what a society thinks is okay. We in theory don't have slavery anymore. We may have wage slaves in a very exploitive system, but societies change and move, but they only change and move if you allow dissent. And if you don't allow peaceful dissent, you beg for, when people are too oppressed, then violence to erupt. And the poor and the meek and the weak are the ones who get ground down most when they're forced to resort to violence because they're not allowed or not permitted to protest otherwise. So, I think it's a terrible trend in terms of how we try and manage communication, conflict, and disagreement in society. But we have a long tradition of that with our first past the post electoral system, ensuring that dissent and an alternate perspective never really gets fair representation around the table in Parliament. So, we've got a lot of work to do, but cooperation and collaboration and building coalitions is the way to say no. If one person is standing out on 86 with the sign and they decide to arrest him, not much is going to change. But if the people of Wingham and the people of Lucknow say, we know that guy and we're going to show up and now you have to arrest us, then you're going to get somewhere.
Thank you, Tony. I'll pass it over to you, Heather.
Thank you. And of course, we need to oppose this piece of legislation. It is weaponizing protest. It is weaponizing legitimate protest. Of course, I think everybody on this call wants to ensure that every single Canadian can practice their faith. Can practice their faith in safety. We have laws on the books to make that happen. So if that is not happening, we need to look at the enforcement of ensuring that people are safe to practice their faith. That said, if there is a real estate deal happening in a community center, that is protestable. If there is somebody from the IDF coming, that is protestable, and stopping that protest, silencing that, shuttering that protest is extraordinarily dangerous for our civil liberties. And it is the weaponization of protest that clearly is targeting Palestinian protesters. So of course, we've got to do everything we can to push back against this. Tanille brought up the idea that we need a strong party so that we can do that work, that we can actually do that. But it adds to the chilling effect that we have seen across this country. We have seen everything from student groups be silenced. In my own riding of Edmonton Strathcona, the students at the University of Alberta who were peacefully trying to stop Canada being complicit in a genocide. We're attacked by police. We have seen this chilling effect on doctors in our community, on teachers, on people that raise their voice. In fact, somebody just yesterday called me in tears because she is being attacked for saying that folks from the IDF that have committed crimes should be held accountable. These are things that people are going through right now, and we've got to give space for that. And the main reason that we must push back on this is the Canadians across this country are standing up and saying no, because the government of Canada is not doing what is necessary to stop a genocide. And in the absence of morally clear action by our government, Canadian citizens are saying no. And we should all be standing together against a genocide. We should all be doing that work. So of course, Bill C9 cannot go forward. We will do what we can in the House. I know that there are not as many of us as there once were, but we will do whatever we can in the House to stop that legislation from coming forward, and to make sure that the anti-Palestinian racism, the attacks on protest, are not something that we allow to continue in this country. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Heather. I'll pass it over to you, Tanille.
The mute button's always in the same place. Yeah, it always seems harder to press every time. Yeah, so Bill C9, it's a part of a pattern when people protest injustice, whether it's Indigenous land defenders or Palestine solidarity, governments try to change the rules. We're seeing this, right, something close to home when we're talking about civil liberties, Vancouver Island University. Palestinians, and the BC court upheld the decision. So we have Zionists and anti-Palestinian orgs that are celebrating this as a win, for silencing the dissent. And this parallels what Bill C9 is looking to enable. It's horrible. So you can't say you believe in free speech and then carve out an exception every time we talk about Palestinian human rights. So withdraw Bill C9 in its entirety and clearly affirm the right to protest, including boycotts and direct action, as a cornerstone of democracy. If this bill had existed in earlier eras, it would have been used against residential school survivors, against anti-apartheid activists, against every movement that has made this country better. So yes, we have to get rid of it. It's not going to bring a better Canada. It's just going to silence people that are arguably some of the most marginalized in our country, that are literally just fighting for basic human rights.
Thank you, Tanille. Over to you, Avi.
Yeah, C9 is a travesty. In particular, the provisions around surveillance and criminalization of protest. The bubble zones should not be, C9 is not the only incident of bubble zones in Canada. They're being enforced and created municipally as well. And they are a very negative development. Bubble zones to me are like the Palestinian exception, which we recognize as a result of anti-Palestinian racism in society. And if we're honest, and it's important to have long existed in progressive movements and spaces as well, the progressive except for Palestine phenomenon. The bubble zones are like the Palestine exception made real in the streets. You actually see the state and the mechanisms of the state and local police forces and sometimes municipal governments actually singling out this one movement for justice and peace in our time for targeting. But as Tanille mentions, it's not the only one, and the Palestine exception cannot be allowed to get dug in through C9, and it can't be allowed to spread to other legitimate forms of protest. We have to remember that we are in a battle, that this is a movement against the silencing of a legitimate movement for Palestinian liberation. The boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement before it, which I was proud to be an early adopter of, was the first generation and the first global Palestinian solidarity phenomenon to get to these special tools that the state of Israel, through its client organizations around the world, started to embed in domestic legislation. And now we're seeing in the genocide an escalation of this and a targeting of all protest. We have a lot of reinforcing mechanisms. We have CJA and the Israel lobby. We have complicit police forces in municipalities. We have provincial governments. We have the IRA definition, which the Jewish Faculty Association was formed to fight, which provides the backdrop and softens the ground for bubble zone legislation to then come in. So this is part of a continuity of efforts to squash the liberation movement of our time. And we have to be really clear that we spoke before a little bit about an elite consensus in our country, which is deeply out of sync with the vast majority of Canadians whose hearts are shattered by the genocide, whose moral outrage is flaming in this moment. There is a huge majoritarian consensus around the genocide that we need to use to push further for Palestinian human rights, to fight anti-Palestinian racism in Canada, and to improve civil liberties for all movements for justice. And C9 is just one of the latest tools that this elite consensus is using to try to silence that. And I think the only value in these things is that sometimes they focus us on a single target and we can build coalitions, bring in the civil liberties movement, for instance, and build our coalition bigger.
Yeah, thank you to all of you for your comments on this issue. It's particularly concerning, just as you said, Heather, in a moment where the Canadian government is not taking action and, on the contrary, engaged in quite complicit policies against the genocide, that the people who are choosing to step up into that role are now the ones that are facing the most extreme forms of repression, like all of you have noted. And so on that note, I want to shift us over to the final long form question, but for this one, we'll be setting the timer just at 2 minutes, just in the interest of time. And for this question, it's a reflection really on the victory of Zoran Mamdani in New York City. So given the electoral success of democratic socialists like New York City Mayor Zoran Mamdani, who ran as part of the Democratic Socialists of America, a party which had an explicit anti-Zionist platform, what lessons should the NDP draw from his successful campaign and the DSA's principled opposition to Zionism? Given that voters responded well to clearer positions on Zionism, should the NDP either adopt or work to adopt a formal anti-Zionist position? And so on this question, we'll pass it over to you, Heather, to start us off.
Why, thank you. Start my timer. Listen, the lesson I take away from what we saw in New York City was a lesson of hope, was a lesson of representation. The fact of the matter is that what he was able to do is really get people excited about things again. And it wasn't because of, there's been lots of talk about it, but it wasn't because of the font he used or the colors he used. It was because he was talking to people about the things that were going to, make their lives better. And he was talking to them in a way that they could access. And he represented something, he represented the idea that the mayor of New York City is Muslim, and that's possible. And you can be the mayor of New York City, and you can put forward real progressive values, real progressive policies that get folks excited about politics again. The other thing I think I learned from watching some of the things that he did is that, he was there. He went and talked to people where they were at. And we've got to start doing that. We've got to do that. And we've got to be unapologetic in our policies of international human rights and protecting the rule of law, protecting every single human being. Yes, we need to be anti-Zionist. And yes, we need to be unapologetic about the progressive values that we all hold. That's what I take from that. And the other thing that I think about, and I think that is so important to keep in mind, is that we need to look at what happened in New York City, but let's not forget our own movement. Let's not forget the progressive voices we have had in our own movement. The fact that Jack Layton got folks excited, that Tommy Douglas did that Rachel Notley did that. Wab Kinew is the most popular politician in this country. Those are things we need to build off as well.
Thank you, Heather. I'll pass it over to you, Tanille.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, it was really inspiring. It's when folks of minorities become extremely successful, it does, incite that hope that Heather mentioned. It but it does more than that. So and this is something, that the leadership race is for me as well as an Indigenous person. Like, we have to see ourselves in these spaces, to know that we can do this work, to know that we do need to be a part of the conversation, and we can be a part of the conversation, and we can be a part of, changing Canada, changing the world by doing that. It's bigger than just that win for what it'll do for his community, the ripple effect it'll have, like, through my community, to just witness that. And yeah, it is also a big motivating factor for why I felt compelled to run in the leadership race. I want other Indigenous people, especially Indigenous women, to see that you can come and you can do this work if you're from a tiny rural community in the middle of nowhere on the far west side of Canada. So I think he reaffirmed that you can champion your morals and still win. You don't have to sacrifice yourself as a human being to win in politics. That's just a misconception that arguably our conservative and liberal friends want you to think, that in order to be successful, you have to fit into this mold, and you don't. If you are unapologetically yourself, a genuine human being, that is what resonates with people. That's what builds a movement and keeps a movement going, is that relationship and that trust that you build between people by being yourself. So I think it shows that if we want to stand firmly for Palestinian rights, we should do it. We can do it. And who gives a beep if it's not politically popular? It's the right thing to do. And as the New Democratic Party, we should be doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do.
Thank you, Tanille. I'll pass it over to you, Avi.
Yeah, I mean, people are speaking to the general intoxication that we felt and that lift we had when Zoran won. But the specifics of the question are thornier than that. Zoran did not repeat the anti-Zionist position of DSA during the campaign. In fact, he made an alliance, a formal alliance with Brad Ladner, a self-described liberal Zionist. What Zoran did, which was inspiring and powerful, and let's remember that unlike any of us, he was running as a Muslim in New York City. And so the pressure on him to climb down from a clear anti-genocide position from the smears of anti-Semitism that he was just the torrent of them. He held his ground on a moral position, and he responded with clarity and with light, cheerfully, to the bad faith attacks that tried to smear him. And I think that is a very inspiring lesson. I'm an anti-Zionist Jewish person. And I will continue to say that, and to help people understand the political ideology of Zionism and how its current incarnation in the 21st century is linked inextricably to the ethnic cleansing of Palestine as an endgame, with the ethno state, a Jewish state of Israel, as its rationale. That's different from a litmus test, which I don't support. I don't think it builds the broadest coalition. But Zoran's incredible, ineffable good nature and moral clarity is exactly what politics needs right now. And we are lucky in Canada that we don't have the same hegemony of that bad faith smear that they leveled at him. But it's come before, and it could come again. And we need to be ready to stand our ground and say clearly, we don't believe in ethno states, no matter where they are. And we stand with Palestinians always.
Thank you, Avi. Tony?
Yes, I mean, the results in New York City, very hopeful, very positive. Canada is both a demographic and a geographic different from New York City. And what we have to do in terms of the lessons from what happened in New York is say, how do we spread our arms wide as a political movement to embrace people across this country, rural and urban, and how do we talk about a hopeful vision, not for a city, but for a society? And I'm a holistic certified educator, holistic management certified educator. And we talk about creating a holistic goal that talks about the quality of life you want to share, the kind of future vision you have for your farm, your ranch, your business, your family, or in this case, your country. And what are the things and how do you have to behave to get to those values? And I've worked on creating a holistic goal for Canada that you can find on our site. But we have to have a vision. People speaks for people because we're speaking with people. And we have to be true to our values. And in terms of Zionism, I don't know about that, but I think we have to be really clear that our values say genocide is unacceptable. States that exhibit the intergenerational trauma that I believe in many ways the Israeli state is acting out after what happened in the 30s and 40s. We have to say it's not acceptable to repeat the horrors of the past that you experienced and inflict them on your neighbors and the other human beings around you. So we have to be strong on our values. And I'm certainly willing to say that I oppose genocide and I oppose Israel on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. I'd like to open it up for just a few minutes to see, or a few seconds to see if there are any rebuttals on this question. Yes, Heather, go ahead.
Thank you. And I want to, I want to thank all of us on this call, or all of you on the call, for being so strong on this. I think it's really important that we are clear there. And I do want to say that I'm very proud of the work that we have done. I think we need to acknowledge that within the House of Commons. You know, the NDP was unapologetic. Like, we have to remember that there was a time when talking about genocide, talking about apartheid, talking about the rights of Palestinians was not something that happened in the House of Commons. Like, the activists in this country, the people who have pushed so hard, and my colleagues and myself within the NDP have moved that needle. You know, you would never even hear a liberal say the word Palestine, let alone Palestinian. And so I think it's important for us also to acknowledge that there is great work happening in this country to move. There is so much more to do. There is so much more we need to do to make our government act according to law. But I will say it's important as well to recognize that in Canada, in our country, in our parliament, the rights of Palestinians are recognized in a way that I think we should all be proud of.
Thank you, Heather. I'll pass it over to you, Tanille.
Yeah, just two quick things. One, Mandami did use a variety of approaches in order to communicate. So I know, like, some people may not think colors or texts or fonts or platforms or whatever matter, but they super do, especially his approach through using visuals. He was on tons of different social media platforms. He made sure he had visual aids. He was out there across so many different methods of communication that really reached out to any person that was willing to watch a TikTok video for 30 seconds. And so we do need to champion that within our party in order to actually grow. And then the other thing I just want to flag is that I'm very sensitive around minority successes and how they're leveraged and utilized. And it's just something that we need to be mindful of when we're trying to kind of borrow these amazing ideas from minority successes.
Thank you, Tanille. Avi?
Yara, I don't know if we're going to get to a section about the NDP's free speech about Palestine within the NDP or not. But I did want to say that I am, like Heather, I think it's worth celebrating what the NDP has been able to do in terms of moving the Overton window within Parliament. But let's not invisibilize the movement, because the NDP doesn't have a proud history. Too many candidates have been canceled for being in support of Palestinian rights for years. Libby Davies, who was deputy leader for 8 years, was attacked by Thomas Mulcair before he was leader, when Jack was still leader, for going to a demo in Vancouver and talking about the Nakba. And Mulcair was calling for Libby to be fired. So the movement has moved the needle with the party. And it was only in 2021 when the party finally passed a Palestine resolution at convention, which was a combination of inside and outside forces, mainly activists from the movement, getting into the NDP and working within our structures to move our position as a party forward. And then we've seen great progress since then. So I think we have to be honest about the history, and it's good to be on the right side of it.
Yeah, thank you, Avi. I think on that note, I'll just comment and say that I think, as we look, for example, to Zoran's victory, we can also see his role in actively working in campaigns in New York City over the course of many years. And in many ways, the movement for Palestine playing an important role both in ushering him into power, right? A lot of the infrastructure that was built through that movement, a movement for Palestine, a movement that did call for anti-Zionist politics, kind of ushering him into power, and then sort of in turn, I think in many ways, his refusal to ever really commit to Zionist positions and pro-Israel positions in the face of immense pressure, also didn't deter his victory, right? Which is, I think, a huge marker of the possibility that you can be vocally in opposition to Israel. You can be a critic of Zionism. You can belong to a party like the DSA and still actually go on to be mayor of arguably the most important city in the United States. So it's definitely, think, a lot of lessons there and a lot of room for self-reflection, like many of you have noted, around the NDP and where the NDP could go. And so on that note, I'd like to transition us over into our lightning round. And so the lightning round is a space where we will ask questions to each contestant, or general questions to you all. And each contestant will either give a thumbs up, so like this, to signal yes, a thumbs down in order to signal no, or a thumb sideways in order to pass. And I'd just like to ask for each of you to hold your answers until I note the final outcome, just for accessibility's sake, in terms of the folks that are tuning in at home. And so we'll start off with the first question in the lightning round. Is Israel guilty of genocide? Wonderful. So all of the contestants have responded yes. The second question, would you arrest Netanyahu if he came to Canada? Also, all yeses across the different candidates. Should the RCMP investigate Canadian citizens who served in the Israeli military? I'm seeing here all yeses as well. Should Canada cancel our free trade agreement with Israel? So all 4 yeses on this question with regards to Canada's free trade agreement with Israel. The 5th question, should Canada sanction Canadian organizations that materially support Israeli settlements or the Israeli military? 4 yes responses to this question as well. Should Canada increase funding to UNRWA, the UN aid agency for Palestinian refugees? Okay, all yeses on this one as well. Should Canada officially recognize and commemorate the Nakba as it does with other historical events and periods? All yeses here as well. So all 4 candidates have indicated yes. Do you support the right of return for all Palestinians expelled from their land since 1948 as enshrined in UN General Assembly Resolution 194? 4 yeses, so yeses across the board on that one before I could even finish reading the UN resolution associated with it. As party leader, would you censor NDP MPs who participate in all expense paid tours sponsored by the Israeli government or other pro-Israel lobby groups? All 4 contestants indicate yes to that question as well. Would you replace the controversial IHRA definition of anti-Semitism with an alternative definition that does not conflate criticism of Zionism with anti-Semitism? All 4 yeses across the board on this one as well. And finally, are Palestinian citizens of Israel within the 1948 borders experiencing apartheid? All 4 candidates answered yes to this question as well. Thank you all for participating in that lightning round, and I think really showcasing a very strong kind of position for the future of the party as it pertains to the questions that were noted here. On this note, I'd like to transition us towards closing statements. And so we'll do this, we'll do closing statements. We actually have 3 minutes, up to 3 minutes each for closing statements. And we'll start off with you, Tanille.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Palestinians, their allies, and peace advocates deserve an NDP that works with them and will stand for what is right. Our leaders claim to care about human rights overseas, but continue to provide diplomatic cover and send weapons to Israel. It's completely unacceptable. Our foreign policy must be one where we stand in solidarity with the people who are being crushed by systems of power. The NDP has a proud history of standing for peace, human rights, and social justice. We talked about a lot of that today. We need to dedicate time in Parliament to advocating for justice internationally and holding the Liberals and Conservatives to account. We need to be pushing for a wide-ranging sanctions, economic and military against Israel. And I'll continue to be making those connections between the colonialism we see against Indigenous people here on Turtle Island and in Palestine. I'm running to build a bold, progressive NDP that is impossible to ignore, that stands up unapologetically with Palestinians and with the working class. Thank you, CJPME, for hosting this debate, and everyone for watching. There's so many people watching to see if we're going to get over 1,000. If you want a leader who will always put people before profits, join us. Let's win power back to the people and build a country that finally lives up to our shared values as Canadians. So thank you so much again.
Thank you so much, Tanille. And a small note too, that we've had close to 1,000 on the YouTube stream as well. So there's been a lot of people really tuning in and getting a chance to hear all of your wonderful insights and positions. Avi, we'll go to you next.
I think that the enormous turnout for this event is a sign that Canadians have been shocked and wounded to the core by witnessing not only a live stream genocide unprecedented in modern history in our lifetimes, but our government's complicity, its support, its lying, its attempt to get on both sides, our prime minister talking about a Zionist Palestinian state. I mean, there have been so many outrages, and just the human cost to Canadians of going to the streets Saturday after Saturday, of doing everything we can think of and not being able to stop a genocide. At least five people have been killed by Israel in Gaza every single day since the so-called ceasefire went into effect. This genocide is ongoing. It is a moral chasm that has opened up in our world. There's a before and an after, and nothing will ever be the same. We have so much more work to do. In Canada, I believe we can build a bigger coalition. We must be bigger. We are going to face renewed and more aggressive threats as our current government, with the Tories waiting in the wings, doubles down on militarizing our society. 5% of our GDP spent on military would mean instruments of social control likely brought to the streets in Canada, because you cannot give that much priority to weapons and war in a society without that war coming home. With the attempts to criminalize protest, C9 in the bubble zones, and the relentless battle in the public sphere on this fundamental moral issue of our time, we have not yet won. But tonight's incredible response with a large audience and the experience that all of us have had traveling the country during this leadership race and seeing in room after room, when you see Palestine, you say free Palestine in a room full of New Democrats, the energy erupts. And this is the ground on which we move forward with a movement that still has a genocide to end, but still has liberation to win. And as New Democrats, we will never put down that banner. It's a fundamental struggle of our time. And we need a much bigger movement, folks. We have to think about ways to make this coalition gigantic and unstoppable. The NDP, with a leader standing really fiercely on the right side of history, can be an excellent ally and a help in building that bigger coalition, standing beside movements, militant trade unions. We need a hot cargo campaign coming from the trade union movement. We have so much more work to do. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Avi. I'll pass it over to you, Tony.
Our campaign is focused on 4 R's: representation, regeneration, redistribution, and redesign. Unless we get adequate, fair, proportional representation for the views that you heard expressed tonight, we are not going to make the gains politically in the Canadian Parliament that have been denied to ordinary people since we got the vote after the First World War. So we have to focus on that. It's part of this struggle, and dealing with the genocide in Gaza is part of this broader, complex, interconnected struggle to build the world that is fair, just, and then regenerative, so that we aren't destroying the planet with militarism and corporate capitalist consumerism, because that is also part of what makes the struggle for land and the effort to control resources part of the ongoing disaster that we face as a human society on this miraculous biological planet on which we live. And then our 3rd R is redistribution, creating that fairer society, and then redesign. And the redesign part is so important because we have gotten locked into these terrible ruts of assuming what we should be doing, what works. Militarism and violence does not work to create a peaceful world. It hasn't done it ever. It's diplomacy, it's listening to people, it's walking in the other person's shoes and trying to understand the world that they live in and why they see it their way and why you see it your way, and then getting together and discuss it. And as part of our effort to try and talk about redesign within this campaign, we are doing a live stream on Saturday from 10 to 10 Eastern Time that will include a session on imagining a Canadian non-violent defense strategy. And imagining, as part of that, I would say, imagining a non-militarized Canadian industrial strategy. Because we have to stop creating the weapons of war and supporting countries that want to use those weapons of war as a pathway to peace. It doesn't work. And Palestinian liberation is the current focus of that horror at the insanity that genocide and nuclear war and ever-increasing armaments, which deprive, that when you choose to arm your society, you are also frequently choosing to defund healthcare, defund pensions, defund childcare, defund housing, defund the things that people really need. So we need a redesign, and we can start by building on the power and the movement of those who are horrified. What gives me hope was the 3 farm tractors and wagons going by honking at my sign saying, "Stop the genocide." It's not just folks in cities. Rural people say, "Stop the genocide."
Thank you so much, Tony. And last but certainly not least, I'll pass it over to you, Heather.
Thank you very much. I know how hard these last number of years have been. I remember the story of Hindra Rab. I remember standing in the House of Commons and trying to get through that speech where I talked about her in her car in the dark, saying that she was so scared. Please come. I remember hearing from humanitarian organizations that said that there was a new acronym that they were using that was Wounded Child, No Surviving Family. And it became something that was so common that there needed to be an acronym for that. And so when I think about those stories, when I think about the suffering that is being endured, the ongoing genocide that continues to be perpetrated against the Palestinian people, I feel that every single one of us needs to use our voice, needs to do what we can to ensure that this stops. This is a moment in time where humanity must step forward. We've got the tools. We know what needs to be done. We know what our government needs to do. We need to put those sanctions in place. We need to stop sending weapons to Israel to use against innocent Palestinians. We need to stop the SIFTA. There are concrete, easy things this government can do. Recognition of Palestine, things that have to happen so that we as Canadians know that we are at least doing what we can to stop the ongoing genocide. We are all judged by how things are allowed to happen. And for me, it is something that I will never stop fighting for. It is why I got into politics. It is why I feel so driven to fight for human rights in Palestine, in Canada, around the world. It is why I have made this my life's work. I feel honored that I get to represent the voices of so many incredible activists, so many incredible Canadians that are using their voice. I've worked with parliamentarians from around the world to see what we can build together. There's lots to do. There's so much more to do. Let's continue this work. Let's be the country we should be. Let's push our government to make sure that we are not complicit in the genocide, that we are doing everything we can to protect the people of Palestine. And thank you for all being here. Thank you to CJPME for hosting this important conversation. I'm deeply grateful.
Thank you so much, Heather, and thank you all. This brings us to the end of our debate this evening. Like Avi said, we're in a moment where chanting Free Palestine in a room of New Democrats results in the room erupting. Palestine is one of the most critical issues of our time, and it's a key issue for voters. And so we really thank you all for being here with us today to speak directly to people who care deeply about this issue and to voters on the future of the NDP as it relates to Palestinian rights and liberation. I'd like to once again express our gratitude also to those who joined us tonight. Over 2,000 people between the Zoom and the YouTube have tuned in, affirming the importance of this issue. Tonight's event was recorded, and the recording will be sent to Eventbrite registrants and made available on YouTube. Just a reminder that if you're compelled by any of the comments that are made by the speakers today, you can register for NDP membership by January 28th, 2026, in order to vote for one of the contestants for NDP leader. We've placed the link to register in the chat. I would also like to thank our supporters, without whom our work at CJPME would not be possible. If you'd like to support events like these, you can become a CJPME monthly donor on our website at www.cjpme.org. Thank you, and wishing you all a great night.
It's a ranked ballot, so they can vote for all of us. Just 1, 2,